was gulping down his breakfast, but he is apparently up for the first 6 minutes. Is that correct?
Sounds correct to me.
Okay. 6 minutes, please.
Recently there were 90 light tactical vehicles that were purchased by the D&D, I think, for $36 million. And when you look at a picture of these, there's no ballistic protection like open air doom buggies. And I just wanted to find out a little bit more about that. In testing, U.S. troops had actually ditched some of the vehicles and chosen to finish their training missions on foot. And I'm just wondering, why would we look at spending $36 million on these vehicles that didn't pass testing with flying colors?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the procurement of those vehicles was based on what the Army had asked for mobility for light forces. But quite rightly, it's been pointed out that that's not the vehicle for highly protected or high-end combat operations. It's not to say that through tactics and training, the vehicle could not be employed. In this case, it still has its purpose. They're being fielded in Latvia, as is known, and there is training value that happens from those systems. Ideally, in close combat operations, it's a very different force, a different set of equipment. But in this case, the specific role that the Army requested for those light forces is satisfied with this vehicle.
Is there a condition when we make purchases like this? The purchase was made through GM Defense in Oshawa, my hometown, and but the vehicles are made in the U.S. Is this just something off the shelf? This is the way it happens in NATO, or is there a consideration given to supply chain coming from Canada when we're spending money?
I don't know the specifics, perhaps our colleague could, but when we do those acquisitions, if ideally we want a competitive bid so we get best dollar for value, all so much the better if it's from an Oshawa company in this case. But because of the nature of that specific vehicle, many of the parts are actually made in Canada as well as assembled in the United States and then brought back into Canada.
Can I go back to the question about the 9mm ammunition? And I'm just wondering about the supply chain there. Is there a reason why the shelves would essentially be bare for training missions for some of our reserve units?
Perhaps, again, Nancy might know the specifics of our munition supply program and the way that industry manufactures those. It's not a singular line for 9mm. It's a line that produces various natures. It's unfortunate that from time to time, there's a shortage, perhaps based on training implication.
Right. Well, would this be the same in theater? Like, there's a shortage. Sorry, there's no ammo.
No, we would, Mr. Chair, we would privilege those folks that are.
So why can't? So now that we're in kind of a globally hot situation, would we not want our soldiers to be trained up, certified on weapons? In terms of readiness, does this not speak to a gap in that?
We agree that we would need a sufficient amount of munitions, training areas, equipment to elevate a higher level of readiness across the board. The issue for us right now is also people. It's the munition availability and the stocks that we hold, but also a function of the time needed in the location. So not every unit, I think the example, Chair, was one of our fine reserve units. Not every unit is at the same level of readiness in our current construct, and therefore, depending on which one we use to elevate its training, may or may not have the ammunition we need.
Okay. And sticking with supply chains, recently there was some reports about our Arctic abilities, including the sleeping bag systems for our soldiers. Is there a plan in place to correct that so that we can operate in our Arctic environments?
There is indeed. Thank you for the question. And I think, as everyone knows, those sleeping bags, that system, in fact, was procured very much as the Army had requested. Notwithstanding, there was always a plan for a second round to ensure that for temperatures even colder than those that were required for that particular set were available, and that contract is being let.
I have a quick question about morale. So morale is such an important thing in the Army. And one thing that can improve morale is that every soldier has a complete kit. Does every soldier in the Army have a sleeping bag? Arctic or not?
Every soldier who needs to have a sleeping bag would have the appropriate kit.
Okay. When I was with the reserves, we were asked to bring our sleeping bags back in because there weren't enough for soldiers that were being deployed.
The regular armed forces, right?
I think that, Chair, the question is fundamental to what we want to do with our reserves. We want to do more. We want to equip them better. But we also need to make choice. With the dollar that we have available, we want to spend it wisely, and it means that we manage equipment. Unfortunately, we manage equipment for the right time and the right place. Some units don't have all the equipment they wish they had.
You have 20 seconds.
That's all I've got.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I just take that last one?
No, you can't. All right. Madame Lalonde, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to come to you in a minute. I just wanted to maybe bring forward and put on notice a motion. And the reason why I will do this is because there was some very reckless comments made by the leader of the official opposition on Monday night. And I'll quote, he said, "I will vote against anti-Israel resolution at the United Nations," he said. I will back Israel's right to defend itself, which includes retaliating against those that attack Israel. Israel must be able to prevent Iran from using nuclear weapons. And if necessary, that means proactively striking Iranian nuclear sites and oil installation to defund the terrorist regime. So for that reason, Mr. Chair, I would like to put on notice a motion, and it reads like, as giving the reckless and dangerous comments of the leader of the official opposition, Mr. Pierre Poilievre, calling potential strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, and pursuant to Standing Order 108-2, the committee undertake a study of the law of armed conflict and Canada's obligation under international law. Merci beaucoup. Sorry about this. Thank you very much. So I want to say thanks to all of you for coming forward in front of our committee. Maybe I'll ask Mrs. Adwin, maybe the ministers did share and made reference to possibilities that you could continue expanding on some of the most recent investment that was made and the importance of your department, but also in the context of the international risk regarding cybersecurity, cyber attack, AI, everything. I know there's been some great news, and I would really like you to expand this morning for us.
Merci, Madame Lalonde, for la question. Thank you. Mr. Chair, what I would start with is by saying that since 2020, CSE's Cyber Center has been publicly warning that the state-sponsored cyber programs of the PRC, of Russia, of Iran, and of North Korea represent a significant threat. At least 20 incidents of a malicious cyber activity on GC networks have been talked about in our most recent annual report. As the Minister mentioned, we have received in the our North Strong and Free Defence Policy Update approximately $3 billion for the CSE to work together with the Canadian Armed Forces new Cyber Command to do everything in our capabilities using the full mandates that we have respectively to counter these threats.
Thank you very much for this. And I know this is probably extremely good news. And I also understand, talking with industry, individuals in that sphere, that Canada is leading, and we're very proud of this. So Thank you. On another subject matter that I think is very dear for myself, and it was briefly touched also with the minister, any of you could, I had the pleasure over the summer to visit numerous military bases and speak with, senior ranking officers, but also our lower officers ranking. And I have to say, the passion, their energy, their desire to serve our country is extraordinary. But I know also that from a recruitment and retention, it's also something that they shared with me. Could we maybe further expand through this committee on some of the initiative that we would like to go forward on helping the recruitment, but also the retention piece?
Maybe I'll start and merci beaucoup pour la question. Je vais
Thank you very much for your question. I'll start and then I'll defer to my colleagues.
Next question, and one that we have broken down into many different parts within the department because the restraints around recruitment revolve around many different things that have been touched upon already in the committee. So the question of how slow we are to move people through the onboarding system, the security clearances that are required, the medical processes that are required, the training facilities that we have, the barracks that are available or not, the equipment. Each of these things is a separate challenge that we are dealing with individually so that as a whole, we will be able to, as the chief said recently, not only hire 6,400 a year, but hopefully more than that as well. I would add that in terms of retention, that goes hand in hand with offering adequate housing, making sure that our CAF members are properly paid, which is the case. They did receive salary increases last year. And of course, ensuring that they have careers that are interesting and fulfilling. And I think that part we see easily, that these are jobs that people want to do. We have no problem with the numbers of folks approaching us. We have a greater problem with moving them through quickly enough that we manage to retain them. But if we have, are we allowed more time?
You've got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, please.
It's heartening to learn of the motivation of young Canadians and easy to be inspired, but also redouble our efforts in our responsibility to them. This committee has recognized the connection between professional conduct and culture, people and recruitment, and how that affects readiness. So it's no surprise to the committee that recruitment, changes to process, changes to procedures and mindset is the number one priority for both our deputy and the chief of defense.
Thank you, Madame Lalonde. Madame Normandine, 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much. I'd like to get back to the question I asked of the minister on the impact in cutbacks in terms of a troop training capacity. The minister didn't said that he hadn't heard it. He said there has been no impact. From what I gathered, there has been some kind of impact analysis that allows him to be this clear on that. I'm wondering if any studies have been done, and if so, can those studies that indicate there has been no impact on training be given to the committee? I can't point specifically to a particular study, but over time, it's important to be sure that we are in a position to train people when we need to train them. And so troops throughout the country receive training. The issue of operational readiness remains. It's important that they be able to take part in our exercises here in Canada, but also abroad with our international partners. And of course, in the context of deployments in Latvia. But you can see also we've deployed these people, we've taken part in exercises, and this indicates that we have indeed been able to address the issues of training over time. Given the increase in demand, I'm wondering whether we have any documentation to the effect that this training is in proportion to the growing needs and that there's no problem with resources. Actually, that's the major issue that we're dealing with right now, and perhaps the Vice can help me with this. But when you take into consideration how many people you can onboard, you kind of have to wonder how many people can actually take the courses and pass those courses. So we might have to change some of the programs to provide access on a continuous basis, so people don't have to wait a few weeks or months between these courses.
Just what, as you take.
Just to add to that, Mr. Chair, we discussed this, the beginning of the process. We discussed the changes to the medical testing, aptitude, and the change in mindset. But when we discussed this, we said it is a pipeline. It's a capacity, capability, process, and priority continuum. And because of that, we have to make some choices as to the decision we need to make to reorient the members or the resources to broaden our training capacity, from basic training all the way to deployment. Thank you very much. The minister mentioned that the relationship with industry was complex. At times, and we've heard a number of witnesses strongly suggest that Canada set up a defense industrial policy, and that is something NATO's asking for, to increase our industrial defense capabilities. So what is actually in place now when it comes to policies? Can we expect that there will be a actual Canadian policy when it comes to defense and relations with the industry? We fully agree that there needs to be a defense industry strategy for Canada. It would be complex, for sure, but we have to look at the impacts throughout the country. This is something we would enjoy discussing with the committee, not necessarily in this particular space, but it would be very useful to have your impressions on these matters as well. What we are really seeking is to have a strategic partnership with the various partners throughout the country and be sure that we will get the supply of what we need when we need it. And that gets back to the issue of ammunition. We are having challenges. The industry was not ready to increase the supply to this extent, despite the fact that we could see that the need was coming. Now we have the money and we want to do this together. Thank you. I'd like to hear what you have to say about the announcement made in September on ComCyber. We know that Canada was not conducting cyber operations. From what I understand, that won't be the case with ComCyber either. I'm wondering what added value there is in creating and striking ComCyber, because it seems to me it's a bit of a redirection of the same thing with no specific mission or additional staff. Or I can start and then I can turn to my colleagues for further support. I think the most important thing is that the idea is to favor that activity. The issues we're dealing with right now indicate that this is going to increase in significance in the next few months. And actually, as of now, we've already discussed government investment in the field and the realm of cybersecurity. And we see this is something that our partners are putting a lot of emphasis on, and that there are many new avenues of cooperation by working on this.
Or Steve?
Question, and I would like to see it answered, but it's not. We've run out of time. Madame Matheson.
Just before this meeting began, we received a letter from the Department of National Defense on military housing. These numbers show that we're only on track to build 650 units across the whole country in the next 5 years. Now, I filed a order paper question earlier in the year, and it claimed the wait list for CAF housing was 1,964 applicants. And we know that the CAF needs to build about 5,000 new homes. So the plan's currently not where it needs to be. What steps are you taking to fill this gap?
Thank you very much for the question. Housing is something that has been challenge for us for decades, and we can only spend the money that we have, obviously. Though there is a lot of money coming up that you have seen and mentioned, and the number of houses that we are expected to build, it doesn't actually show what we currently spend, of course. And we already have tens of millions of dollars annually in building and procuring new housing, as well as renovating the housing that we already have. In addition to that, though, and to the industrial strategy point, we are looking to work with industry very differently, with the housing development industry very differently, because we know we need housing in very different ways. So we have land, obviously, and we have space available that we know the municipalities and the provinces and territories want us to use for housing. So we are shortly going out with information to developers around the country, and very specifically in certain spots, but asking for information on levels of interest in building housing that could serve not only CAF members, but also the local population, and indeed, where possible, focus on Indigenous communities. And what we would like as well is to be able to include in those new buildings daycare, childcare centers, and make sure they are accessible to all. And so therefore hitting multiple stones at the same time. So a lot more to follow on that. It's really a good news story, I hope, in working with the housing developers too.
Okay. Currently in the House, we have Bill C-66. I'm hoping that we can get past some shenanigans in the House in order to bring this bill to committee. A lot of people have been waiting a long time for it to be brought forward, and I know there are a lot of concerns. We have a lot of work to do in this committee on that piece of legislation, but I'm concerned too about ensuring that more cases aren't stayed due to the transferring of cases between jurisdictions. Can you provide any updates on how many cases have been successfully transferred and how many cases have successfully reached a verdict in the civilian courts, and how have we seen any more cases stayed?
I don't have that information, although I don't think any more have been stayed. I don't think you would. We'll have to provide that to you later.
Okay, I would appreciate that you provide that information to the committee. Beyond culture change, there's this perpetuation amongst, or feeling amongst survivors that there's this rotten apple theory, that if we can get through a handful of bad actors on this stage, that the problem will go away. Mm-hmm. And they certainly believe that cannot happen, that the problem is permissive culture, allows perpetrators to use their power and test how far they'll go. So beyond Bill C-66, what's the government's next steps to combating sexual misconduct?
We would certainly agree that there is no single solution, that there is no one bad apple or group that we could get rid of and that would make the difference. This is an ongoing challenge for all of us, and it starts at the level of recruitment, making sure that the people we're recruiting understand the role and the responsibilities of being a member of the military, and ensuring that they uphold the highest codes of conduct and behavior throughout their career. So while we're also continuing through our training at every possible opportunity and demonstrating leadership at the top, both on the civilian side as well as on the uniform side, there will be a constant demonstration of what is expected of military members throughout their careers. Maybe there's more specifics. You know, there's all
fairly general. Are there specifics that you can point to?
So training, for sure, that is an integral part of everything that we do. The supports remain in place, as you have seen, but I'd really rather focus on prevention than trying to deal with the impacts afterwards. And I think that really comes down to how we react and interact daily with our colleagues and members.
Was there something further from the Lieutenant General?
Only to compliment that, it begins with the implementation of all 209 recommendations from the 4 external audits. As was mentioned, there's training and education, but we're trying to adapt behavior, and that can only be done if we are monitoring ourselves in a different way. I think the most important undertaking by General Karen Yaw is the selection of leaders and recognizing that there has been bias in the way we were doing that. So getting external views, getting external looks at the individuals we are identifying for progression in a way that's completely different than we've done in the past. But this is going to be an ongoing endeavor to change culture for a long time.
Thank you, Ms. Masson. Well, we might be able to do this if we run it tight. 5-minute round, 25 minutes. We should be able to make it. Starting with Ms. Gallant, 5 minutes, please.
My questions are for CSE. Now, other nations like the U.S. have mandated critical security practices like multi-factor authentication in 2021 and are actively adopting zero trust architecture. Why is Canada lagging in implementing these fundamental safeguards across government agencies?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, CSE, in our most recent annual report, published quite a lot of detail about the extent to which we are issuing advice and guidance in lockstep with the Americans and our other Five Eye allies concerning cybersecurity best practices for industry and for government.
Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act of 2022 mandates that organizations in 16 critical infrastructure sectors report significant cyber incidents to CISA within 72 hours and ransomware payments within 24 hours. What is Canada doing? What comparable legislation or regulations does Canada have in place for mandatory cyber incident reporting across critical infrastructure sectors? And what are the specific reporting timelines and requirements for organizations?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Bill C-26, an act respecting cybersecurity, is currently in the Senate awaiting second reading. This will create mandatory reporting obligations for critical infrastructure, but only those that are federally regulated. So that's 4 sectors.
Okay. How are we effectively addressing the risk of insider threats within government agencies?
They turn it on for you.
They do? I'm sorry.
By itself.
I'm sorry. This is my first time
That's
in
all right.
committee.
That's right. Yes.
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, the security and intelligence community in the Government of Canada is taking a number of steps to address insider threat. Many of these have been reviewed recently by our review agencies, and some of those measures are concerning the security clearances that we ask employees to undertake. Other measures I can't talk about in this public environment.
How does our cybersecurity funding compare to other G7 nations on a per capita basis?
Thank you for the question. I will look into the per capita funding. I don't have that breakdown exactly, but I can say that we are very competitive with and comparable to our G7 allies and Five Eye partners.
What recent investments has Canada made in advanced cyber defense technologies to counter state-sponsored cyber threats?
The $3 billion I referred to from the defense policy update is a significant investment in exactly that.
How is the government ensuring that cybersecurity considerations are integrated into all aspects of policy making, national policy making?
My colleagues in, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Our colleagues in the Treasury Board Secretariat and the CSE and others relevant departments are working together to ensure the adoption of cybersecurity best practices and standards in all government operations and procurements.
How prepared are we to respond to a large-scale cyber attack on national infrastructure or government systems?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure we can ever be prepared enough. That is to say, we are doing the best we can, and I don't hope that we find out.
How are we addressing these cybersecurity risks associated with emerging technologies like 5G, IoT, and AI?
Thank you for the question. In the Bill C-26, an act respecting cybersecurity, addresses exactly the 5G opportunity. In other avenues of advanced technology such as artificial intelligence or the advent of quantum computing, there is a significant amount of research underway in research agencies, and CSE recently published with the National Research Council a call for proposals concerning artificial intelligence security.
Yes, our recent Nobel Prize laureate is very concerned about how we're going to protect ourselves against AI. So I trust that you'll be looking into that. How effective are our current measures in preventing and mitigating ransom software attacks on public institutions?
We have a track record. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We have a track record of success in protecting government institutions. Of course, it is, ça va sans dire que we sometimes don't know what we don't know. And
In securing Canada's electoral systems against cyber interference.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat that?
Are there sufficient investments in securing Canada's electoral systems against cyber interference?
The fact that there have been investments made has been talked about in the public inquiry on foreign interference. I cannot comment on the sufficientness of them.
How is the government ensuring that cybersecurity policies are effectively implemented across all departments?
Thank you for the question. Could you just repeat, is it how effectively?
How is the government ensuring that cybersecurity policies are effectively implemented across all departments?
Thank you for the question. Again, the CSE works closely with the Treasury Board Secretariat to make sure that all government departments are adopting and implementing the measures that we impose upon them.
Thank you, Ms. Gallant. Mr. Collins, 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to start with the question. One of the questions that I asked the minister when he was here, in his parting remarks to CAF members, General Eyre urged members to quote inoculate yourself and those around you against toxic disinformation in our society, and we must stop it from seeping into our ranks. And so my question to the minister was around Russia and China's efforts, but you also struggle with what your members, read and see in the news. There's a crazy theory right now being pushed by an alt-right American representative who's talking about government controlling the weather. And, here during the COVID situation, we had the ivermectin party of Canada pushing misinformation in the House and undermining the efforts of public health officials as it relates to combating the virus and the efficacy of the vaccine. And so, the misinformation isn't just coming from Russia and China. It's actually, it's all around us. And so back to that inoculation that General Eyre referenced, and I'm almost hesitant to use the word because it almost sounds like a conspiracy theory in the making. But can you talk about your efforts internally as it relates to dealing with your members and the misinformation that they might hear from our enemies abroad and domestically, even within this House?
Thank you. Chair, I was getting excited about the button again. We spent a lot of time thinking about the 4 contested areas of warfighting. Happy to expand, but one of them is the information environment. And we tend to think of these in terms of our adversary that are well known, some of the threat actors and what they're doing to counter narratives or to use information in a way counter to what we understand is the truth. Where we need to work harder is the prevalence of social media and the way young Canadians communicate, exchange, and learn. And we're not there yet. But it begins with over-communicating from leaders using all the tools that we have available to ensure that our understanding of what's happening and our truthfulness gets out first. But it's a constant tension. And in one way, we have young, educated men and women that are challenging us on why and what, and they're learning it through social media. So the exchange is much healthier. It challenges us as leaders. We have much more work to do in the information environment.
May The CSE is also responsible for a public awareness campaign on behalf of the Government of Canada. It doesn't have a catchy title, but it is disinformation.ca. We believe that a big opportunity is to encourage Canadians in all parts of the country and in every place to think skeptically about the information that they receive.
Thanks for those answers. I'll switch gears now to recruitment. It's obviously top of mind for everyone around the table. Normally, some initiatives don't go forward because there's lack of funds, and this isn't one of those instances. I had the opportunity in June to tour the recruitment center right here in Ottawa and spent a couple hours with staff in terms of walking me through how someone makes application and then gets the offer. And I found, that internally, there's that whole issue. Well, for me, it boiled down to, in the office that I was in, and I'm sure it's different across the country, a number of vacancies then prevent the information and the applications from moving forward in a timely way. And, it's just so disheartening to see so many people apply. And by the time that they've received an offer, they've already made another life decision, right? They have to pay the bills. They have to find maybe other employment. They thought this process might be 4 to 6 weeks, and it ends up to be 10 to 12 months. And so something internally is broken. And, you've received a lot of questions today, and we've talked about this in the committee in the past, and we actually need to do a study on it. And I'm just, can you give us some details in terms of how we fix that? And, the dominoes fall in a way that work against us. And to know that we're turning so many people away is, it's worse than disheartening. So we've heard some generalities today, but can you provide specifics to the committee?
I'll endeavor to do so. The first instance, we recognize that we're in a competition for talent. I was recently with my counterparts in the Pentagon from Australia, UK, New Zealand, as well as the US, and we all share the same concern. We're competing for talent. We recognized in the second instance that our own processes are working against us. So although we've given some specific examples, Chair, we're talking about business transformation is what we're looking at. We're looking at how security clearances, medical, and aptitude testing is done. We are not compromising standards. We want to access Canadians faster. And so instead of having front end all that completed, we're doing smart risk-based decisions on entering folks in with reliability checks and completing that process while they're doing their basic training. That's one example of the business transformation. But it's absolutely true that we need to automate our system. This is the digital age, and we need to be digital in our approach. My own son is going through the recruiting process, so I'm learning without saying anything, and I can accept there are significant frustrations. It's not a one-size-fits-all. We are not compromising standards. For some of our competitive trades for the men and women, we want to do the aptitude testing and the deep security clearances faster.
May I just as a side say that this has been a preoccupation of the committee, and in the last time the CDS was here, she undertook to provide more detail in the plan. She is about to receive a letter reminding her of her undertaking to provide more detail. So, with that, 2.5 minutes, Madame Normandine.
Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais revenir sur comme.
Thank you. I'd like to get back to ComCyber. You mentioned that its role was to focus on the importance for Canada of being more active when it comes to cybersecurity. But I get the feeling that it's as though it's a creature that is created with people from various areas. Let's say they focus on acquisition of information, but no additional funds have been allocated. So how does this improve Canada's credibility internationally when it comes to Pillar 2 of AUKUS? Is that enough?
We all want to answer.
Je commence?
Can I start? Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. With respect to CAF Cyber and any cyber operation, the CSC's annual report admits that there has been progress in a number of operations, but there's no further detail. That said, I can promise this. Since the bill has given us some authorities, we've exercised those. You suggested that the CAF announcement was actually just pulling together some resources from elsewhere, but I can assure you that that pulling together is very important because it means we're on an equal footing with our allies. I'll turn to my colleague. He'll have more to say on this, but I can promise you this. From the perspective of the CSE and with our Five Eyes partners, we are a much appreciated ally in this for our capabilities in this area. Rather than to, I'd like to move to another issue. Does the idea of having additional positions matter there? How can we be competitive versus the private sector? Are we creating new positions in this organization?
5 seconds to answer that question. I'm going to just move on. And if you can work your answer in some other way, that would be helpful. Madame Matheson, by 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Just in terms of following up on some of the questions around recruitment, there are significant changes that are happening, and a lot of times that it sounds great at the top, but a lot of these significant changes maybe aren't going through in terms of the ranks of those who have to enforce them. How are you communicating that with those people who have to actually enforce those changes?
If maybe just, Mr. Chair, just precision around, do you mean the implementation of the changes we're making? Or,
yes.
Maybe I'll use an example, Chair, related to security clearances. Obviously, we're not going to compromise the standards, but we need to change when and with threshold at what point, because it demands a number of resources from the department, but also from CSIS to allow that. But that's an example of a change in process that's very centralized, because of the assurance we need to give ourselves, but also our allies, because of some of the equipment that's being used that is their intellectual property. In terms of, maybe to flip it now to the recruiter at the recruiting center, the Chief of Defense and our deputy have created a new forum called the Recruiting Campaign Board, where we look at specific issues along the path from interest all the way through to completion of training. And the decisions that are made on a Thursday are transmitted directly through the recruiting centers immediately. For example, the aptitude testing or the medical. The medical will be the next topic, but the aptitude testing, we're going to be continuing with that, but it's when it takes place, before entry or after. That changes the threshold for some of the recruiting or the recruiters' work on which files get accepted faster.
And just with my remaining time, Mr. Chair, I would like to put a motion on notice. And my apologies to the translators. This is quite lengthy, and I did not give it to them in advance. So to read into the record that given that the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to change its actions to prevent the real and imminent risk of genocide, given that the UN Human Rights Council called on all states to cease the sale and transfer of weapons to Israel immediately or else risk complicity in war crimes or acts of genocide, given that Parliament voted in March of 2024 in support of the NDP's motion to end arms transfers to Israel, given Canada's clear legal obligations under the Arms Trade Treaty against transferring weapons to another country if there is a probable risk that they could be used in violations of international humanitarian law, given that the government refusing to close loopholes that allow military goods and technology to be shipped from Canada to Israel via the United States through the Canada-U.S. Defense Production Sharing Agreement, and given that the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of National Defense have refused to give clear answers regarding the potential use of Canadian exports of military goods and technology in Israel's horrific siege on Gaza, one, the committee immediately order the production of all relevant memoranda, briefing notes, emails, records of conversation, and all other related records from the offices of the Minister of National Defense, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Privy Council Office, and the Prime Minister's Office related to arms transfers to Israel. 2, all relevant memoranda, briefing notes, emails, records of conversation, and all other related records from the offices of the Minister of National Defence, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Privy Council Office, the Canadian Commercial Corporation, and the Prime Minister's Office related to the $60 million deal to transfer Canadian-made M933A1 120mm high explosive mortar cartridges and related equipment to the United States. 3. All relevant memoranda, briefing notes, emails, records of conversation, and all other related records from the offices of the Minister of National Defence, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Privy Council Office, and the Canadian Commercial Corporation, and the Prime Minister's Office related to analysis of Canada's arms trade treaty obligations, and 4. All legal analysis conducted by the Department of National Defence, the Department of Justice, ISED, Global Affairs Canada, and the Canadian Commercial Corporation on the impact of the U.S. Canada Defence Production Sharing Agreement on our international law obligations. 5. All relevant memoranda, briefing notes, emails, records of conversation, and all other related records from the offices of the Minister of National Defence, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Privy Council Office, and the Prime Minister's Office related to Canada-Israel Strategic Partnership. 2. That these documents be provided to the committee within 60 days. That pursuant to Standing Order 108-2, upon receipt of these documents, the committee undertake a study of Canada's defence industry and our arms trade treaty obligations, that the committee shall hold a minimum of 8 meetings for the duration of the study, and that the committee invite the Minister of National Defence, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Industry, the CEO of the Canadian Commercial Corporation, along with relevant government officials, international law experts, researchers, and civil society organizations, and that the committee report its findings to the House. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, and Mr. Bazan, 5 minutes.
Thank you. And I'll be looking forward to talking to JDLS in London, Ontario, to talk about how this is going to hurt jobs in their plant with that motion that was just tabled. Miss or ADM Hadwin, you mentioned a website. Did you say it was disinformation.ca?
Thought so.
Okay, I just bought it because it was available on the GoDaddy. It's not owned. I think you guys should get it bought up real quick.
Yeah. I'll get back to you with the...
Yeah. So if we're going to be handling disinformation, let's make sure that the Russians or the PRC doesn't get a hold of that before too long.
It's on the conservative website.
Yeah. Anyway, I also want to go back to a comment by General Kelsey in response to an earlier question from Mr. Stewart. You said that the shortage of 9mm munitions, the shortage of maintenance on vehicles in our reserve units is all because we're essentially needing those dollars for Reg Force.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I was acknowledging poorly that the past 3 decades we have optimized the Army in this case for contribution efforts. We did such with great efficiency, such that in many cases we didn't have the people to equal our structure nor the equipment. This was a choice, and it manifested most precisely in our reserve units that we actually rely on heavily. This was to optimize our output. We made choices here in Canada across our units.
So this is more of a function of the recent budget cuts that we see, that you aren't having the ability, almost $1 billion a year is getting cut, the lapse funding, you can't tap that to help our reserve units. We got, a lot of our different units out there at the armory level is well staffed, that they need the support to make sure that the equipment works and that they're fully trained.
It's absolutely true that we want to invest on our reserves better. We need them. We need the people. We need their expertise.
Because essentially your surge capacity is your reserves.
It is indeed. And in fact, we've got a number of them working full-time right now. We can get the exact number, but it's between 8,000 and 9,000 reservists working full-time for us, filling key positions.
Okay, General Air in the past has been here and talked about the shortages that we faced. We're almost 16,000 short of members of the Canadian Armed Forces. We're, in addition, 10,000 of those that are already through basic training are still undertrained and undeployable. A number of months ago, do we have current numbers right now? Like, where are we at where we're supposed to be as mandated strength, and how short are we for the different divisions of the Canadian Armed Forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, Special Forces?
We're still short.
We're still short. How much?
We are well short. We'll get you you deserve the precise answer. I don't have it with me. In terms of the recruiting, the folks coming through the door, we're halfway through our intake plan, and we're better than 50%, but we have much work to be done. And as I alluded to, we use those shortfalls to access our reserve forces. We need to make smart choices, because with every reservist we take out of the units, they can't fulfill their own training obligations. So we have lots of work to be done.
Minister Anand, 18 months ago plus, made the announcement that we were buying NASAMS and for Ukraine, and then announced that they were en route over 14 months ago. Still not delivered. When are the NASAMS going to finally get delivered to Ukraine that we purchased with Canadian taxpayer dollars?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. In fact, NASAMS have been, Canada has invested to make sure that Ukraine is provided with NASAMS. We're working with the U.S. government in order to make sure that this is delivered, and at this point in time, we're expecting delivery in 2025.
When in 2025?
Early in 2025.
Yeah, because they need that system now. They're getting bombed every day. Now, also there is a promise to send some renovated or improved upon labs, the older Coyotes, that were getting re-armored and re-equipped at Armatech. Has that contract been signed? All those labs are to also be sent to Ukraine.
The contract for Armatech is being worked on by Commercial Canadian Corporation, and that is in discussion at this point in time.
Okay.
Mr. Zan, Madame Lalonde, final 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you. We are here to talk about the priority of the Minister of National Defense, yourself, through maybe a mandate letter. Certainly, if I look at what's been happening in the Indo-Pacific region, and we have not really touched on this today, and I certainly, we've seen a regional tension in the South China Sea, and certainly more broadly in the Indo-Pacific. I also understand that we recently in the region, we are talking with like-minded partners on some topics, from naval partnership on artificial intelligence. Could you speak on how specifically the CAF role in the Indo-Pacific region has changed over the past 2 years? And what is this intended to signal? And I know there's been great initiatives, so I would really like us to share this to the committee.
I'll start and then others can add. We were really pleased to have been part of the Indo-Pacific strategy that was led by our colleagues at Global Affairs, and to be able to access then some new funding that allows us to really ramp up our operations and exercises across the Indo-Pacific. This has meant in practical terms much more interaction and direct collaboration at all levels, both on the civilian side, including CSE, I would add to that, as well as on the military side. In fact, our senior researchers and developers have just come back from discussions in Australia where we were working very explicitly on issues that we all face right now, including, for instance, underwater drones, other technologies that are being developed. AI would be another one of those too, where working together we can make a difference. You will also have seen much mention of our sailing plans in Indo-Pacific, our work in Operation Neon, recognizing what is happening in North Korea and South Korea, and regular, of course, interactions with all of our other major trading partners there. The minister was recently in South Korea and in Japan as well. And of course, the Prime Minister is in ASEAN right now, in Vientiane and Laos. But for perhaps some more specifics on the military side.
I recently was with my counterpart in the U.S. and unsolicited offered Mr. Chair his sincere thanks for what Canada is doing, showing greater, more visible presence in the maritime and air domains. Perhaps the undervalued but hugely important is where Canada is actually leading in some defense research initiatives that has caught the attraction of certainly Australia and New Zealand. All that to say, as we expand our presence there and refoster our relationships with Japan and the Republic of Korea and others, it is noticed by our allies and surely welcome.
Thank you very much. We only have a few minutes left, and I really would like to hear. First, I want to say thanks to all of you, but also to all our CAF and their families for their enormous contribution to Canada and to the world. But maybe I would just like to leave it open. This committee has been hard at work trying to bring out partisan interests into this committee. And today with you here, it would be nice maybe to have a few thoughts about, based on the priorities and the mandate letter, what's next? What do we need to focus on? I know we talked about many initiatives. If there's something that you would like to share with us, it would be greatly appreciated.
Oh, okay. Actually, what we would really welcome is a conversation with you, perhaps over in one of our buildings. We have some big plans that we need to discuss, including the defense industrial strategy that we need to draft, and we would really appreciate having input from all across the country, but particularly from this committee. Housing, we're looking forward to your reporting on housing coming up. We think we have lots of good ideas, but there's always more to come. And in fact, the interactions directly with those affected are going to make the difference in what the outcome is and how successful we are on our Pathfinder initiative. Also, always happy to discuss I know we didn't really today talk about procurement reform. This is something very much on our minds, that many things that we can control internally, that we can change our own processes to be able to speed up. It does mean making choices that are difficult. And in some cases, if we're doing more what I would call directed procurement, it means that somebody doesn't get it. So there is always a trade-off, but that does manage then to speed up the actual outcome at the end. We've seen some instances of that being very successful recently. Okay. Actually, I would point to the RFI on submarines, which we're hoping will be a demonstration of how we can actually do procurement differently, with the success at the end being the capabilities that we need in a timely manner.
Yeah, we're going to have to leave it there, Madame Lalonde. On behalf of the committee, I wanted to thank you, but I also want to thank you for the invitation to have further discussions in another setting. Partisanship aside, we're all going in the same direction here, and we are in a threat environment that is, how should we say, ever accelerating, ever challenging. On that point, colleagues, when we return from the Thanksgiving break, yes, yeah. For the ever alert Ms. Gallant, that is not a hint. And besides which, that would be way above my pay grade. We have for October 22nd, we have the Ukrainian MPs for the first hour, and Messrs. Fadden and Thibault for the second. And then we will do a briefing on the Middle East on the Thursday, continue with our space defense on the 29th, and then the 31st, the Finnish speaker, and then for the first hour, and space defense for the second hour. So hopefully we will. Yes.
Very briefly, I know there was conversation regarding our delegation of MPs from Ukraine. Are we hosting them in this particular setting in a very open format, or they have preferred a more in-camera personal interaction?
We haven't heard, but I'm assured by the clerk that he'll cook a good breakfast for them. So, with that, meeting adjourned.